Hello and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional Podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. You can join us at WB40.com. Before we begin today's podcast, though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we record this podcast. In my case, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their extraordinarily long history as storytellers. Today in the confessional, I'm really excited to be chatting to my special guest. Her name is Kate McCaffrey. Kate McCaffrey is an award-winning young adult author. In fact, she's got 5 award-winning young adult novels, which is extraordinary. She writes about incredible content, like topics that are often controversial but really, really important. But I'm talking to Kate today because she has written her first adult novel, and it is called Double Lives. It is a brilliant read. If you love true crime, you're going to love this book. The main character in this book is, her name is Amy Reinhart, who is a journalist from WA, because of course Kate hails from WA, and she's trying to solve a mystery, a bit of a crime via a podcast. So we love a good podcast, that's for sure. Kate is brilliant. We chat about lots of things, including personal stories that she drew on to actually create some of her award-winning work. She is brilliant. This was such a delightful chat. I really loved it. Please welcome to the confessional, Kate McCaffrey.
Hey there. When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Hello, Kate. Welcome to the confessional. How are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for having me, Sandy.
I am super thrilled to have you, actually. Thanks for joining me. Now, I know, as we're recording this, no one else would know this, but we know this, that you're in WA and I'm over here in Victoria. So, of course, it's kind of lunchtime-ish here and it's early morning there.
Yeah,
so
I just had my first coffee. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Excellent. Good. It's too early for a wine, so we'll definitely... Is it? Look, I figure it's 5 o'clock somewhere in the world, Kate. I'm guessing.
I'm with you on that.
It's so lovely to chat with you. You have had the most extraordinary career, I have to say, in terms of Australian writers, because it's a tough gig being a writer, I think, sometimes in this country especially. But you've written not one, Kate, but 5 award-winning young adult novels. Like, that's pretty phenomenal.
Well, thank you. Yes.
I wanted to jump in, though. I'm going to talk about some of these novels because it's quite amazing. So, young adult is such a powerful genre. And I know, like, way back in the days when I went to uni and I did things like writing for children, writing for young adult, I found it a particularly difficult genre to write. And I think people who do it well are superstars because it's so powerful, the audience that you reach. It's not just reaching what we call young adult or teenage readers. It's actually reaching a whole demographic. So I have a daughter in her 20s who's mad for a bit of young adult. And she probably just kept following along. You know what I mean? Some of these series and books are quite amazing. So how did you first sort of delve into that? What made you think, I want to be a young adult writer?
I was a high school teacher. So an English literature, art high school teacher. And I think really it started from probably one of my first days on the job where I walked into this low ability year 10 class, which was predominantly boys, brandishing the Diary of Anne Frank. And I did this. now we're going to brainstorm everything we know about World War II. And it was quite apparent that that knowledge was limited. And I realised that I couldn't teach the Diary of Anne Frank without probably doing 4 or 6 weeks of history lessons. So I ended up replacing it with the book that became hugely popular, and it was called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And it was written, she was 16, I think, when she wrote the book, and it was about the 2 rival gangs, the Socias and the Greasers. And even though it was so outdated and the language was so American, I'd read it aloud and I'd say, they were being chased by the fuzz. And one of the boys would go, "What's the fuzz, miss?" And I'd say, "It's the cops." And he'd say, "Why didn't you say cops?" And I'd say, "Because it's American and it's like 200 years old." It was at that point that I realised that there was this group of people who hated reading. And if you could find a book that they thought they could identify the characters, it was relatable, then you could have them reading. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to capture that group of kids that felt that reading wasn't for them. And to do that, I felt you needed to sort of tell them stories that they could identify with.
Yeah, wow. And I'm going to say that book, and you're right, I'm sure it hasn't really stood the test of time in terms of language use, the Americanism of it. But I remember reading that book when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful to me. I think what has probably, I hope has stood up, though, is her incredible characterization. Her characters were so 3D and so believable and so brilliant, and heartbreakingly so at times when I think about, Pony Boy, etc. Obviously, she had Soda Pop. Oh, yeah, there we go. Oh, wow, yeah. And she went on to obviously have an incredible career beyond that, because her books were picked up and made into film that kids could relate to. But the actual story behind that, I think, probably still stands. This whole thing of coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, of being on the wrong side of the tracks, of having to kind of fight your way into the world and while trying to keep some hope that there's a better life for you out there while terrible things are going on around you. Well done you for doing that. I think that's really quite amazing. And you're right. I think there obviously, but anywhere between that and now, there's maybe been a big gap. So what other sort of young adult authors sort of inspired you, do you think, to want to bring more sort of modern, contemporary young adult novels into the world for these kids to be reading?
Yeah, I think I was definitely influenced by Sonia Hartnett.
Yeah,
I felt that her work and J.C. Burke, both of those authors, and of course Melinda Marchetta, Alibrandi,
Alibrandi, yes.
you can't talk about YA without looking at that, which I think has just celebrated its 30th year anniversary or something. Yeah.
So hard to believe that, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah. But it was those distinctly Australian voices that I wanted to capture, because I think that, our kids, particularly now with Netflix and streaming, they're saturated with American high schools, and our high schools aren't like that. Our high schools are really quite different. In fact, it's funny because one of my books, In Ecstasy, which is about, obviously, the drug ecstasy, it was picked up by an American publisher, and I had to Americanise it. So I had to take out all the geographical markers that made it West Australian. I had to actually change the language to American, and I had to change the ending, because they didn't actually want it to be so hopeful, which I thought was a bit peculiar.
They wanted a bit of a darker view. So let me talk about these books for a minute, because, Kate, I'm going to keep all of our listeners in suspense, because you have just written your very first adult novel, which is exciting, and we're going to talk all about that. But I want to talk about this your young adult novels, because they're all award-winning. They're all quite amazing. So the first one in 2006, is that right, was Destroying Avalon?
Yep. Destroying Avalon.
Yep, brilliant. What's amazing about that one is you actually won the Western Australia Premier's Book Award for your very first young adult novel. Way to go.
You sort of like, hit a high note and like, where do you go from there?
So where did the idea for the first book come from?
Oh, I was actually writing 2 other manuscripts at the time. And I stopped one. I finished teaching. I was on maternity leave. I finished teaching, and the last school I taught at was this technology school. And it was like a lighthouse school. It was the first of its kind, and I was teaching art, and I had all this technology, but the kids were navigating the systems much quicker than we were. And so we were seeing the rise of kids using technology to bully other kids. But I'd left and I was writing other manuscripts, and I stopped this day for lunch and I put the daytime TV on, which was a big no-no when I was growing up. But I figured I was a grown-up now and I had my own kids, so I could watch daytime TV if I liked. And there was this show with this American psychiatrist whose name I should not mention, Dr. Phil, talking to this young girl about this hideous experience that she'd had in this high school. And he used the term cyberbullying. And I was like, oh, that's what I was witnessing. And so then I researched it, and a quick research showed me that this was actually worldwide. And within a 2-week period, I wrote Destroying Avalon. It was actually called A Person of Interest, its working title. And I sent it out to several publishers, and Fremantle Press picked it up. And it wasn't even really a fully formed manuscript when I sent it to them, but they helped me develop it, and they helped develop my writing career.
How amazing. And, for those listening along who may not understand it, that's actually quite rare, isn't it, to send out your very first manuscript, not even fully formed, and a publisher says, yes, I'll take it. But that sort of talks to how powerful your work is. And as you say, like how important that was, especially in 2006 when people were just starting to coin that term cyberbullying, bullying, later it would be, cyber trolling, and powerful voices like, say, Tara Moss, who came to the fore to say this is really happening and we need to be aware of it. And, incredible. Your next book, you were talking about in ecstasy. So I love that. Clearly about ecstasy, the drug. Goes on to win the Australian Family Therapist Children's Book Award. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So it was that award it's something that, so they say therapists, you should use this when you're dealing with adolescents to help them navigate perhaps, that part that they're going through, and this book might help them. So, that was a bit of an honour as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, book number 3 comes along, and it's Beautiful Monster. I feel like I'm just listing them all here, but because they're so, this is so incredible and mind-blowing for me. So Beautiful Monster comes along. It's been listed as a 2011 white, is it Rover?
Raven.
White Raven, and kind of read my notes here. And but what's really nice is this was actually listed as a noteworthy book by the International Youth Library in Munich, Germany. Tell me about that. They select the 200 what they deem most noteworthy titles around the world. And so, it was a real honour to have Beautiful Monster listed as a White Raven. At that time, you're not meant to have favourites. It's like your children, but Beautiful Monster definitely was my favourite. And it's interesting because it's the only one of my 5 YA that I wrote in the third person. The other 4 are first person narrative. And it was just because this was a bit more psychological, because it was about eating disorder and body dysmorphia. So, and again, inspired by a student that I had who was in my art class, who wore the school woolen jumper no matter what temperature it was. It was like 45 degrees, and the jumper would be reaching down over the ends of her fingers, and she'd be painting. And it was only at the school ball in the July that I saw that she was a skeleton, and she had wasted away in front of our very eyes, and nobody had seen it happening. Hello, Sandy here from the Good Girl Confessional Podcast. The Good Girl Confessional Podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see the rest of the video, please head over to WB40.com and subscribe to WB40 Extra. By subscribing to WB40 Extra, you're helping to support the hard-won wisdom of incredible women. So thank you. Please remember to like, share and follow.